Okay, so we are right in the middle. We are right in the middle of the protest. There's that group that's over there that's closer to Ryan, and there's this group over here. And I want you to look and see what they just started doing a few seconds ago. They started kneeling. Many people out here just started kneeling, and now they're yelling, "No justice, no peace," as they continue to kneel. But we're right in the middle, so there's one group on this side, and at the beginning of this group, there is a line of police officers that are butted up against a line of protesters, and then you'll see the group over there. Again, there's a massive group over there that's closer to where Ryan Kruger is right now. And even up on the building right there, you can see that there are people who are standing out, who are watching this all happen. And everything is pretty calm. I mean, and as you can see again, just turning around, that there are more people who have started to kneel. And that's what they've really been doing the past couple of minutes. They'll have a couple of chants, and then they'll start kneeling. And for the most part, everyone is extremely calm. We did see maybe one or two water bottles being thrown a few minutes ago, but for the most part, everyone is still continuing to protest as peacefully as possible. There's been no huge confrontations. And again, we're right in the middle of all of this now. So the past probably 20 minutes, there's been no confrontations. Everyone's continued to protest. Everyone's been kneeling. They'll go from chanting to singing and to continuing to exercise that right to protest. And again, since we've been here in the middle, there's been no pushing, there's been no shoving. Everyone just kind of continues to keep on protesting. Again, there is that line right there of police officers. They're not letting anyone pass that line. So there are protesters who are butting up against police officers right there. And butting up isn't really the correct term. They're standing face to face right now, and police officers are not letting them through to the other side. And again, over there is still another large crowd that is also continuing to protest right now. And then there are many people who are just kind of sitting around, who are sitting around and watching things and just being here out of support for everyone else. And there are people just kind of walking back and forth between the two sides right now.